would you do if you had an opportunity handed to you in your DMs? Would you be bold enough to take it, even though it's something you've never done before? Today's guest, Tianna Faye Soto, is a public speaker who ventured from psychology to working as a journalist and editor at Women's Health to becoming a full-time public speaker. I'm excited to share this interview with you because Tiana is, one, such an amazing soul, and I just absolutely love this conversation with her. But she also shares how that journey actually was for her. It's not often that we get a sneak peek into the life of a public speaker and what that entails. And so I hope that you enjoyed today's episode of Avoiding Average. All right. Hello, and welcome back to the Avoiding Average podcast. My name is Susan Gates, and I'm your host. And today I'm super excited because we have a public speaking guest today. Her name is Tianna Soto, and she is a former wellness journalist, former editor at Women's Health magazine, and a public speaker now. And so, Tianna, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to hear more about you and how you got there.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, career journeys are an interesting topic, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Yes, awesome. So I guess well, let's start from the beginning for you. Like, where did you begin before public speaking was a thing for you?
Yeah, well, I will take you way back to the beginning, just so you and your listeners have some background on who I am and what I'm about. But basically, I grew up in North Carolina, so I spent a lot of my life there. In the South, I guess I would consider that the South. Some people don't, but I do. I loved life there. Honestly, it was great. I am a Puerto Rican, Jamaican, Chinese woman, so I have a
Ooh.
mixed background. And growing up in North Carolina, where at the time there were not a whole lot of mixed folks around me, I think that was a really big thing that impacted my story and the way that I show up and move through the world. It's a topic that's really near and dear to me, but honestly, one that I didn't start fully unraveling until my adult life. So when I think back on my life in North Carolina, I'm like, oh, that really was a big part, of my life, my identity. But I spent most of my life in North Carolina, went to school there, went to college there. And then after that, I worked in a mental health internship in Florida for a couple of months. I took a year to uh, find myself, as they say. I worked a bunch of different jobs, was kind of exploring what I wanted to do. And then about a year after graduation, moved to New York City for graduate school in clinical and counseling psychology. And my specialization was spirit, mind, body practice. So
Huh?
to a lot
That's
of
cool.
people, they were like, what is that? That sounds like Hogwarts. Is that even a real program? But for me, it was so exciting and
Yeah.
has really informed the work that I do today. So to be quite honest, I have been passionate about a lot of things since I was young and didn't really know what my exact job was going to be, but I always knew what I loved and didn't love and the kind of work that I wanted to be doing. I wanted to help people and work directly with folks to hopefully make a positive impact. And so I worked in the mental health field for a couple of years, worked in a addiction clinic, worked in research labs, all sorts of things. And then really loved that work, but just felt this call to do something else. After a couple of years in New York City, I ironically had a lot of friends who I actually met them in theater. I'm a musical theater kid as well.
Oh, wow.
But I remember doing a show one summer and I was meeting all these people who were in the show with me who were also journalists and writers and working in magazines. And as I'm going to date myself here, but as someone who grew up reading print magazines and still collects them to this day, I was like, that is so exciting. I kind of always wanted to know what the journalism world was like and somehow found my way in it through a lot of networking and reaching out to people and figuring out how I could get started. And so that kind of led me down this other path of journalism. So I pivoted a little bit from my psychology profession to working in media. And that was really exciting. And then during the pandemic, I'm always hesitant to say like pandemic, COVID. It's like those words, such buzzwords now. But I remember being indoors, like a lot of people in the US were, and was kind of reevaluating my life, my career, what I wanted my time to look like, and just spending so much time indoors, honestly, and with myself, made me realize that I wanted a life that was flexible, where I didn't have to be in an office all the time. And so this kind of led me down to the speaking route. I got asked to do a webinar virtually one day for Meta, which, saying that
Nice.
now, is like a wild thing to say out loud. But at the time, I got a message from someone, I think it was on LinkedIn. They were like, "Hey, I really like what you're about. Would you want to give a talk to our employees on the artificial intelligence team?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I sure would." But like, also so much imposter syndrome. I was like, what could I possibly have to share with these super smart people? And I'm not an engineer. I don't work in AI. So I was just kind of amazed. But that is where I got started. And since then, I've had different chapters of my career. There have been chapters where I'm public speaking and writing on the side. There have been times where I'm working a full 9 to 5 in media and speaking when I can. And just this past year, I made the leap to go all in on speaking. So it's an interesting time in the journey, but that's kind of a high level view of where I've been.
Oh, wow. That's an incredible journey. I think there's like, well, one that like your first public speaking engagement was with Meta.
It's
That's
crazy.
amazing.
Thank you. It's so wild. I don't think I recognized the magnitude of it at the time. I
Mhm.
was like, "Oh, I just want to do a good job. Like, this person
Yeah.
found me on the internet." And but now looking back, I'm like, "Wow, that's actually a pretty big deal." So, thank you.
Well, one, congratulations for actually having the courage to do that. I think that there's like the you mentioned the imposter syndrome. Like that's like a huge thing that kind of prevents a lot of people from actually going out there and doing things. And so, um, I know we're kind of jumping around here, but like, what did you do to work through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And imposter syndrome is so interesting because, in a way, for me, it's present all the time. And
Ugh.
I envy and admire people who don't have that. They're like, no, I'm confident 24/7. But I think for me,
Does that
there's always
exist?
yeah, I'm like, that's amazing. Please show me your ways. For me, it's not like I'm on a journey of trying not to let imposter syndrome run the show. But I think with
Mm,
speaking, it's so interesting because, someone's usually hiring you to come in and speak to their group or their hundreds of employees or students or whatever it is. And there's always a little moment for me, even though I've done this hundreds of times at this point, where I'm about to go on stage or about to turn on Zoom, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I have to give to these folks? I have so much to learn from them too. And
mm,
the thing I've done, honestly, to combat that voice in my head is a lot of positive self-talk, which might sound cheesy to some folks, but I think it's constantly reminding myself, like, I was brought in for a reason. They want to hear what I have to say. Also, something that's helped me is not focusing on myself in that event, but focusing on the audience and
mm.
who they are, what their stories are, how I can meet them on that particular day in that moment. And that takes the light away from me and, puts
Yeah.
it on them in a way of like, I think of it as we're here to share space together and learn something from each other. And sometimes I will even say that at the beginning of a speech, like, I'm so honored to be here. I have butterflies and I feel like I have so much to learn from you all as well. And it might sound strange to some people because it's like, no, you're the expert that they brought in, right? To like teach them something. But for me, something about saying that phrase signals to my brain and my body that I'm okay, that we're all in this together. And
Mm.
it kind of calms my nerves. So it's definitely easy to get into that state of imposter syndrome, whether you're, a speaker in a corporate job or anything. And it's tough. And the last thing I'll say on this too is that sometimes having, I don't know what the right metaphor is, but like having my blinders on and just focusing on my mission is really helpful for tuning out the noise that can sometimes
Mm.
contribute to imposter syndrome. Like, I think sometimes it creeps in when you start to compare yourself or you're scrolling on Instagram or Threads and you're like, oh my gosh, all these people are doing all these things for their business. And like, I haven't done that thing. And it just starts to mess with your mind. So I try to keep a really strong mindset around like who I am, what I hope to share and achieve.
Mm.
And I hope that, every day those practices will help me overcome the imposter syndrome. But it's tough for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that it's interesting because it's like public speaking is, very public, right? You're literally putting yourself out there. And I think a lot of people struggle with being seen and just being judged, really. That's usually what it comes down to, right? Is the fear of being judged by others. Um, and so being able to create those energetic boundaries, we'll say, for yourself in private, but then also allowing yourself to reframe it in a different way, that you're here to be with other people. You're not necessarily just the one that is the focus of this, is a really cool way to look at it too. I think that that mindset shift is probably really helpful, and hopefully helpful for other people too who may face that. I know for me personally, public speaking is terrifying.
Yeah. And you're doing it.
Well, yeah. So that's the funny thing is, I think when I first started this podcast, I was like, this, I don't know, this is like a fun side project for me, right? And then my first podcast guest, she had called out that this was essentially public speaking. And I was like, oh, is it?
You're like, I had no idea about that.
Yeah, basically.
I love that.
Yeah. But I guess from your experience, like you had gone from, a very psychological background into the public speaking world. Um, what, well, I guess in between, you also did journalism and editing for Women's Health. Like, how did those kind of tie in? Like, how did you go from each of those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny, sometimes when I recount my career, I'm like, how did I make those leaps? Like, where was I in my life? Like, how was I fitting that all in? But I would say, in terms of the question, like, how does it all tie in? I was telling someone this the other day. I try to see my career and life as this, I don't know, this image, maybe like patchwork, or I'm a very visual person. So I visualize my life as a series of different colors and chapters, but that there's this
Mm.
common red thread that connects all of those stories. And for me, I think my so called red thread or North Star, my mission is always to serve people and to honor people's stories. And when I look back at my career in psychology, in journalism and storytelling and writing, editing, and now public speaking, I think, they're different industries, but for me, they all connect in that way that you're getting to know people, you're often interviewing people. Even when I'm on stage, I'm, doing a Q&A after, or like meeting somebody at the side of the stage, or highlighting an aspect of my own story that hopefully inspires the audience to think about their own background and upbringing and story as well. So I think for me, that's kind of how it all ties in. I really do think storytelling and, doing things like this, being on podcasts and sharing your voice, all those things are so powerful and just remind us that sometimes we're more alike than we think we are, or we
Yeah.
kind of all want the same thing at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah.
And, it's been hard, I think, logistically to figure out, am I a speaker? Am I an editor? Am I a writer? There have been seasons where I'm doing all three of those things. And
Mm.
the identity piece is very interesting, and for sure it is hard. Like, there have been seasons where, like I said, I was working a 9 to 5 editing or writing job, and then speaking on the weekend or on my time off. And I'm not recommending that everybody use all their PTO days to do that, but at the time I was like really ambitious. I was like, I can do this, I believe in this, side hustle, and I want to see where it goes. And then eventually there were seasons where the speaking, was more life giving to me than my 9 to 5 job, and it's sometimes more financially supportive as well. And I was like, oh, this could be something here. So
Mm.
I think the themes for me have always tied in. I think too that labels can be such a funny thing. So even as I've navigated these different spaces, there's always been questions for me of like, all right, how do I present myself? What is the way that I want to show up? Like, even silly things like what's in my Instagram bio. I'm like, I don't know if this even makes sense. Like, I'm doing all these different things. And anyway, so for me, it has always made sense. Like, it's always tied in. But I think when you're presenting yourself to the world and doing jobs that are kind of different in some ways, like as a reporter or as a someone supporting folks in therapy, you're kind of living a more private existence in some ways, or
Mm.
you're really shedding light on others' stories. And then when you step on a stage as a public speaker, you're kind of telling your own. So there is this interesting mental shift. But for me, it's always like, how can I serve? How can I help? And how can I use my gifts and background to get people to realize their own? And if that's interviewing someone for a story, or standing on stage and telling people something vulnerable about myself, I think, or I hope that it all kind of ties together.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I think you made an interesting point about like the identity part of it. Like, especially when you're doing all these different things all at once, it's hard to, you know, pigeonhole yourself into like a little box. And society loves a box, right? They
Definitely.
love for you just to be able to like, hey, I'm Tiana. I do this. And that's it.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes it's hard for people to comprehend that, you know, you are this multifaceted person with all these different things that you enjoy and do. Um, and so I imagine that was probably difficult explaining, like you had mentioned with your Instagram bio. Like, how do you even describe that? I don't know. So
Yeah.
what would you say to other people who are maybe navigating that same sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with everything you just said in terms of like we are not just one thing. We are all multifaceted, and as much as we love to sometimes even cling to the safety of labels or feel really attached to our identity at work or whatever it may be, there's so much more to us behind those labels and so much more to us than meets the eye. And so I always tell people, you know, you are not just one thing. Please don't feel like you have to just be one thing. And even on stage, I tell people a little bit about my background. And then I'm like, hey, I'm telling you this so that you know who I am, but also so that you can hopefully remind yourself to be curious and give yourself permission to do the things that you want to do, even if it doesn't make sense to your friends, your parents, your advisor, right? Like they're not always going to understand. That's the hard truth of life. But if you feel like you are multi passionate and multifaceted, which you are, everybody is, I think the world needs what we have and what our strengths are and what our interests are. So I know that was a long winded answer, but I think just letting people give themselves that permission and letting them know like, hey, if you're an engineer, it's also okay to make pottery and make art or sing. Like you don't have to just be one or the other, and it's such a beautiful thing that you can be both and all of the above.
I love that. I love the giving yourself permission to be curious. Like, I think a lot of people just will tend to stick to one thing. Like, I remember a phase in my life where I was actually an engineer, but I I at one point in my life I was like, I'm not creative. I don't know why I decided that, but growing up, like I loved art. I loved doing all things creative. And then for whatever reason, I decided that I wasn't. It may have been like a project or something that happened along the way. Um, and at that point, I guess I decided that those two things could not exist together. Like the logical side and the creative side could not happen. And so that kind of derailed me in a sense, or um, left me unable to pursue things that actually brought me joy. And instead, you know, pursue this very uh, is it right brain, left brain? I don't remember which side. That's the engineering side of things. Um, and yeah, I think it really did me a disservice. And so I love that you're promoting this concept of being curious and being open to whatever else you can potentially be besides, you know, your career or whatever it is that you decided is your label. And so what what else do you kind of speak to audiences about when you're giving these speeches?
Yeah, well, I there's a couple of buckets I like to call them. I have a few different keynotes, but they all again have similar red threads between all of them. I would say the first bucket is mental health and wellness, coming from a psychology background, mental health background. That is something I deeply care about, especially nowadays. I just think everyone is struggling with something, even if it's not a diagnosable thing. And we all need a reminder that we're okay, we're doing our best, and there's hope at the end of the tunnel. And so there's a lot of speeches that I give that are speaking to mental health and well-being. You know, what we can do to care for ourselves, what boundaries we might need to set for the sake of our health and wellness, etc. And then another kind of camp that I speak to is the idea of identity and belonging, which I've kind of alluded to with my own personal story. But I feel that growing up as a mixed woman, mixed cultural identities in a place where there really weren't a lot, at least at the time that I was growing up, caused me to think a lot about how I walk through the world, how I show up, what my values are. family, relationships, all of the things, right? Identity touches everything. And so there are some speeches that I will give that speak to this idea of living between worlds and what it's like
Mm.
to dance between different worlds, whether it's cultural worlds or spiritual or professional, personal. And so I'll usually use my story as kind of a jumping off point to get audience members to think about their own. And occasionally, sometimes when it's an interactive style program, I'll, break them out into groups and have everybody talk to each other about different questions about their identity or things that they care about. So I would say mental health and wellness, this identity world. And then I do a lot of women's empowerment work as well for sororities and women's conferences, things like that, where we are trying to tap into our inner power and really just push past these ideals of perfectionism or how we should be or should act or what we should pursue and just really tap into what lights us up. So I think for me, again, all of those things kind of can be interrelated, but those are
Yeah.
the three main areas I usually find myself in as a speaker.
Oh, that's fascinating. The mental health and wellness makes sense, with your background, as well as like the identity part. But the women's empowerment part, like how did you kind of get to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I mean, it's hard to pick favorites, but when I am in women-centric spaces, usually when I'm invited in to speak, it is just energetically a very different feel than
Mm.
mixed crowds. And it's so interesting. And I don't say that to be like, exclusion or anything with gender or like, I just feel that the energy is palpable and exciting when I'm in groups with women. And it's funny because I never consciously made the decision to start kind of catering to that group with my speeches in any way, but I felt growing up that I was lucky to have women mentors and folks in my community that reminded me of my power, whether it was, an advisor in college or my own mom or my grandmother. Like I just felt very connected to this idea that we have this amazing wealth of knowledge and intuition and passion and drive that often gets
Mm.
lost along the way due to a number of reasons. But
Yeah.
I would say one like point in my life where I was like, oh, I think women specifically need to hear this message is I was in New York in grad school. I'll never forget it. I was on a very crowded subway ride. And if you or any of your listeners have ever spent time in New York City, it could be just so overwhelming, like overstimulating. And I was at a point in my grad school journey where I had a lot of assignments and was just really stressed. And I kept hearing about this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa
Mm.
Pinkola Estes. And it's like this tiny book, but I had seen it everywhere. And I was like, I just feel like I need to read this. And reading that book on the subway on my way home just like blew my mind. I was like a few pages in, and basically, she's speaking about that wealth of wisdom and inner knowledge and intuition that all women have that we lose touch with over the years in our pursuit of, success or different identities or in relationships. And something about the way it was worded just really spoke to me. And so I would say, when I was in graduate school studying this intersection of psychology and mind body wellness and also finding my own way as a young woman, I was like, oh, there's something here. So I
Mm.
didn't know explicitly what it was going to be yet, but I think I felt inspired to start writing about it. And that's kind of how one of my keynotes was born. And I felt like women just need that reminder sometimes. And to be honest, we all need that reminder. You don't have to be a woman to like feel that. I give that speech to all sorts of groups, not just women only. But
Yeah.
I thought it was particularly interesting. We tend to put others before ourselves and have a lot of responsibilities and feel like even sometimes career wise that we can't pursue certain things that we want because of our other, obligations. So,
Mm.
yeah, that's a little bit about, I think, why the women's empowerment topic is so important to me.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you've touched on a lot of great things there, and I think it is fascinating to me that, you know, women in general tend to be bogged down by a lot of expectations and a lot of things that essentially end up stripping like away access to some of the like our intuition and things that guide us internally, and or there's a lot of judgment of, you know, women are too emotional or whatever. And really, like, those sort of things guide us too. And so it's important. Um, and I think it's awesome that you are giving those speeches and having those conversations with other people to share that information with them, because I do think that is important. Um, you had mentioned that, like, when you're speaking in front of women, you do get a different sense of energy from the audience that you have. And so, what has your experience been like working with different audiences and working with their energy? Because I know, as somebody who kind of puts themselves out there in public, it's a little difficult to see that online, like in social media and things like that. But when you're in front of an audience or one-on-one with somebody, that's a little bit more obvious, we'll say. So what has that been like for you navigating that?
Yeah, I love this question because truly every live audience is so different. And I always say this to like friends, family, aspiring speakers, you know, it's not that you're walking into places and then people are giving you like a standing ovation every time. They're like so locked in, right? Like I speak to a lot of college students right now, so we all know what it's like to be in school and be inundated with lectures and
Yeah.
classes and speakers. And, you know, sometimes they're on their phone or they're looking around or they think I can't see them, but I can. Right. So they're like talking to their friends or they're on their laptop. At the same time, it totally depends. Like there's so many factors that go into that audience experience, the time of day, the type of event it is, whether there's a football game right after the event and they're all getting ready to go. Even like corporations, like I've had the honor of speaking at some big companies, and one of them brought me in to give my, ironically, to give my women's empowerment speech because the event was being hosted or sponsored by one of their women's affinity groups. And I get to the room and it's all men,
Whoa.
and I was like, okay. So, and I say this because, like, I mean, I love it. I'm so glad they showed up. I'm so glad that they felt connected in some way to this talk because we need allyship. We need everyone in the conversation. But that for me was a really eye opening experience because I was like, okay, in the back of my mind, you know, that imposter syndrome sets in. You're like, are these references going to land? Is this going to make sense? Is this going to feel as, you know, quote unquote, powerful as it has felt in the past versus when I'm giving this same speech to a group of sorority women or a group of women on the first day of Women's History Month. I remember giving that talk, for instance, at a national Greek life convention. It was
Oh,
all
okay.
women and non-binary folks. And I remember at the time it was there was something going on in the news around Roe v. Wade and a lot of just like hot button topics about reproductive justice and women's rights. And I remember feeling that energy a lot when I walked in the room and just like people were talking about it, they were thinking about it. I was like, oh my gosh, like how am I going to deliver this, you know, keeping in mind the context of the world and the country, but also knowing that I can't assume everyone in the crowd feels the same way that I do about these topics. So, anyway, I tell this story because there's so much, you know, that goes into the audience experience. And that day happened to be a wonderful one. I got my first standing ovation ever. People
Oh.
were crying. It was like unbelievable. And I have to think that the social context played a role in that, maybe, or maybe it was just the day or the conference or the women in the room. But yeah, I think there are moments where you give that speech, it hits, it's great, people are super lit up. There's also times you could give that exact same keynote in a group, and they're like, "Cool, bye, have a good day," like, and then you move on, right, and get on a plane and go home. Like that's the reality, I think, of at least my role as a keynote speaker is you're usually visiting a company or a school, delivering your talk, maybe sticking around to talk with people if they want to stick around and talk with you. Sometimes it's bigger, right? There's like conferences, we'll go to lunch together. Not everyone is the same, but yeah, it's been really interesting and eye opening working with different audiences. And from an identity perspective as well, it's made me acutely aware of how I walk into spaces and made me reflect on my own story too. Like yes, I've spoken at some big companies, but the majority of the time I'm going to small towns in the Midwest, in states I've never been to, or speaking with, you know, maybe a community college that you've never heard of before. And the students are all from that town and have never left that town. So that's very different than, you know, my life. I've moved around a little
Yeah.
bit, and been in big cities and small places. So I guess what I'm saying is every audience is different, but it's also very humbling because in a way I have to be sort of this chameleon who can meet different types of people where they are and hopefully deliver that same message, but also take in the crowd, understand who they are, what they're walking in with. And I always have, calls with my schools or companies beforehand to kind of get to know them before I walk in the space, which helps a lot. But yeah, every single event is very, very different.
Oh, okay. So I have a bunch of questions now after
Yes.
that.
I know that was a long answer. I probably went all over the place. So.
No, no, that's totally fine. I think that gave a really good insight or like a view into what it's like being a public speaker because I think it in essence it's like it's a job, right? And every job has its ups and downs and times where you do really well and times where you don't. And so the experiences that you've had where you've gone from like having a standing ovation to just having like people be like, okay, bye.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? I mean, I imagine you've probably gotten used to this at this point, but when initially, like when you started doing public speaking more frequently, what was that like for you navigating the times where maybe it didn't, well, I won't say it went as well, but you didn't get that standing ovation?
For sure. No, that's a great question because I think it's also sometimes really hard to read the audience response. And I even think of myself in college or in classes when I was younger, like I was very attentive, and I would try to smile and like let the teacher know or like people know that I was listening. But sometimes people are super locked in and attentive, but their face is like, so you're standing on stage, you're like, oh my gosh, they hate me, right? Like they're so bored. Like I'm boring them. I'm cutting into their texting time or whatever it is. And then I very quickly realized when I started public speaking that the audience will surprise you. And I think as
Mm.
speakers, we have to let the audience surprise us because there have been times where I've been like, oh my gosh, I think they thought this was like the most boring thing ever. But hey, I gave it my all. That's okay. And then sometimes there will be like nobody who comes up to you afterwards to talk. And you're like, okay, that's fine. Maybe they got what they needed out of it. But then I'll go home and I'll get like 5 DMs on Instagram from
Mm.
people that are like, hey, I was too shy to come up and say this, but you really impacted me. Or I had a high school student actually one time say, thank you so much for coming. I would really love to share some of your slides with my parents because I think it would help them understand some of the mental health challenges that I'm going through. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I try to go into it, not really thinking about the audience response because at the end of the day, I think the people who get something out of it will get that out of it, whether they tell me or not. And if they don't, they don't. You're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and that's okay. But I think, yeah, at the beginning, the imposter syndrome was louder. Like I remember thinking, I just want to do a good job. I just want to give the perfect, 1 hour talk and like make sure I cram all this information into it so that I'm giving them all this value. And then the more you do it, you realize like people are much more interested in the speaker as a person and their story than all the frameworks and stats and tips and tricks you're going to give them. And something I do is I customize every talk, of course, to the audience. It's not like a cookie cutter presentation every time, but recognizing that, you can't please everyone. Someone will get something out of it. And sometimes they'll also get things out of it that you don't expect. Like I'll give a whole talk about mental health and I kid you not, like people will come up after and they'll be like, oh my gosh, you mentioned that you took piano as a kid. Like, do you still play? And that's like that's what they picked up. Or like, oh, I really want to study psychology too. Like, can I, hop on a Zoom with you sometime? I'm applying to grad school. And hey, if that's what they got out of it, amazing, because you connected to me, I connected to you, like a part of my story touched you in some way. And that for me is equally, if not more worth it than like them walking away fully understanding all the self-care tips that I shared with them. So I don't know if I really answered your question here, but I definitely have had to mentally tell myself, like, you're doing great. You showed up to serve. It's not about you. And you did your job. Like, that's honestly a really simple phrase that sometimes I repeat to myself. And it may not work for everybody, but like speaking is such a unique thing in that I'm getting on a plane, traveling who knows how many hours to get somewhere. I'm booking my hotel, I'm going to sound check, I'm doing the thing, and then it's over. And then you go back and then you go home and
Mhm.
prepare for the next one. So it's kind of like being a musician on tour, to be honest. Like you have to constantly check in with your energy. And if I'm spending all my energy worrying about like what the kid in the back row was thinking about me, it's impossible for me to stay healthy and sane and ready for my next one. So I don't know. It's a lot. It's definitely a process, but I always tell people if they want to be public speakers, like if you're in it for the ego and yourself, it's going to be very hard for you because you're not going to get a standing ovation every time, and you probably more often than not are going to get crowds that are cool and collected and quiet, but it's not going to be this like roaring thing every time.
Yeah. Oh, that's some really good advice. I was thinking about like how basically you went from journalism, which is, you're it's not quite as like public as public speaking is, but you're still sort of doing the same thing where you are putting your words out there for people to consume, take from it whatever they will, and probably won't hear anything back about it, right? And so I think that's interesting that those two kind of tie in that way. But I also think that there is a whole lot of strength that is required to do that, like a lot of mental strength to be able to say, okay, you know what, I did my job, did the best I could, moving on to the next thing. I think that's where a lot of people probably get hung up. I mean, I know I probably get hung up on it too sometimes, where I'm like, oh gosh, what did people think? Um, but that's just part of the journey, I think. What else do you feel like you've taken away from your journey as a public speaker?
Hmm. So many things. I it's funny because I feel like I learned so much about myself and my own personality and my own energy, and also just about other people. I think for myself, speaking has been so illuminating, so humbling in many ways. Like I spoke about with the audience, you just have to learn how to sustain yourself and keep
Mm.
going, and even travel. Like we could have a whole podcast on travel alone. Like I always love to travel. It's a life I always imagined myself living, but oh my gosh, when you're doing that every week of the month, sometimes multiple gigs in a week in different states, and have to like really check in with your own health and your own energy, it's really tough. And I think I've learned a lot about bandwidth and boundaries.
Mm.
I've also learned a lot about rituals and things that I need to do to make sure that I feel, calm and collected and grounded before a speech. For instance, I always use the same rental car company. I, for the most part, fly the same airline. I like certain seats on the plane. Like this sounds really like luxurious, but the truth is it's not. And these are just little things that help me feel calmer when I'm, on the road for a lot of the year. Um, there are certain like funny things that I'll do also, like if I have a really long travel day, or if I've been too in speaking mode and need to like empty my brain, sometimes I'll just watch Shark Tank, which is so funny. Like, because it's not a brain emptying show by any means. It's actually quite inspiring to me because I'm not that type of entrepreneur. I'm like, wow, how did this person come up with this? But like something about getting some ice cream from Dairy Queen and going back to my hotel after a gig and watching Shark Tank is like my favorite thing ever. So
Oh,
just
that.
like little things about myself that I'm like, oh, I didn't expect this to be so calming. And, relationships too. I think having people who support your vision and your unconventional job is so important. And I'm
Mhm.
lucky that like my friends and family are amazed by it, and they're like, that's so cool, like couldn't be me, but happy for your journey. But it means a lot to have that support, and at the same time not everyone is going to understand, and that's okay too. And I'm, not saying there's anybody in my life that like has not wanted me to do this, but I think when you're in a profession that you have to build your own confidence to do it every day and like put yourself out there and show up on stage for a lot of people, I don't know, confidence can come from your community too. So I've tried to be
Mm.
intentional about surrounding myself with people who dream big and who are okay with like unconventional career paths, and who, are curious like you and want to know more about it. Without, judging what that journey has looked like for me. So community, self-care, boundaries, travel life, work-life balance, if that even exists. I think those are all things I've picked up in the past few years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so quite the journey for you then with learning all those things. I think that all of them are crucial in one in entrepreneurship, but then just life in general, honestly.
Mhm.
Um, so you had mentioned like self-care being a really important part of it. What what was your experience like with that? I think a lot of people in a normal 9 to 5, they can burn out really easily from that, but entrepreneurship too is also, you have to wear multiple hats doing that, right? And so um, it's very easy to burn yourself out in that regard. And especially adding in all the travel that you do, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's so true. Burnout is very real, whether you're in a 9 to 5 structure or an entrepreneur, like you said. I've definitely been in cycles of burnout before, particularly when I was doing 9 to 5 and speaking at the same
Oh,
time,
yeah, I
because
bet.
my yeah, my weekends, evenings, and days off were spent also working. And at the time, I had all of this energy and ambition to do it. And then one day I woke up, I was like, actually, I'm so tired and haven't had a weekend off in months. So
Mhm.
I would really like to slow down. And it's always an ongoing conversation with myself, I think. Even now, like there are months of the year that are quieter for speaking for me, and then there are some that are really, really busy, and I'm on the road most of the month. So usually when I'm not on the road, self-care looks like being really strict about my routine, like which by the way, I have been pretty terrible at my whole life. Like routine has never been my
Oh,
thing.
terrible.
Yeah, it's so hard, and I love when people are like, "Oh, I do this every morning." I'm like, "Every day looks different for me." I just can't. I don't know if it's like creative nature in us, but it's all over the place. And like right now, for instance, it's a quieter period. I'm traveling later this week, but the past few weeks have been a little quieter for travel. And I try to go on a walk every day, try to enjoy matcha every day, like
Nice.
write a little bit, do something fun. And then I really try, this is because I'm a night owl and my brain is always on. I try to close my laptop like by a certain time and physically put it in another room so that I'm not
Mm,
looking at it, because I
smart.
will always feel tempted to work. And it's just always there, especially as an entrepreneur. Like you don't have set work hours. So to me, it feels like it's all the time. But yeah, I think those things actually have been so helpful for me in terms of self care. And then when I'm on the road, I have to be really precious about my time and my energy. So sometimes people will be texting me and I'm running through the airport trying to make my connection. And I'm like, I can't respond right now. Like, this is just not, and it sounds mean, right? Like I'm not trying to ignore my friends and my loved ones, but I just can't. Like my brain can only focus on the next step. And, if I have a talk later in the afternoon and I'm getting emails and messages, there used to be a time where I would answer all of them and I'd be like on my way to sound check and I'm like, all right, I'm on top of everything. And now it's like, I can't. I'm only going to focus on my speech. And when the speech is done, I will return to my inbox. Maybe tomorrow I'll return, but now I can't. So boundaries are a huge part of self-care for me because it feels like, I'm always plugged in and the inbox is always full. It's never going to stop unless I put the boundaries in place. So I think that's been a big one for me.
That is, I feel like I see myself in a lot of those things where it's like, yeah, I could totally do all this stuff, and really, it's better. That time is better utilized by taking care of yourself and making sure that you're ready to perform or to do whatever it is you actually need to do, as opposed to what you think you need to do. And so, thank you for sharing that. When when you're going into like um, some of the speeches that you're about to give, do you have any rituals that you do to prepare yourself for that?
I love this question. So many speakers do have really cool rituals. Mine tend to be pretty simple right now. I think so. Growing up, I did a lot of theater and singing and music, and similar to how you'd warm up for an instrument or warm up your voice, I do try to warm up my voice, especially if it's a
Okay.
morning talk, because I'm not a morning person. So when I wake up, I'm
That's
like
fair.
gravelly and I'm like scratching. My eyes are still opening. So I do try to do like some, lip trills or things like that in my hotel or in my car on the way to the event. There have been a few times where I've tried to do like stretching or some type of quick yoga routine just to ground myself and like feel my body. Something that I noticed about halfway through when I first started speaking, like a couple years in, um, I started to get nerves before I walked on
Mm.
stage, which was very interesting because in the past I truthfully like had not struggled with stage fright, I think because I was a
Okay.
theater kid. But all of a sudden I started getting really nervous and I couldn't figure out why. Sure there's some psychosomatic stuff that was coming up, but I would almost feel like my body was like floating out of my physical body,
Oh,
and my
interesting.
hands were sweating, my chest was, it was like all the classic symptoms of stage fright or anxiety or
Mm.
almost a panic attack. And there are a couple reasons I think that was happening, but at the time I remember being very freaked out by it and feeling like I physically needed to like be rooted into the floor. So now I try to do grounding exercises. If I have to sit in a chair, sometimes I'll do deep breathing, or I'll if I'm at an event, I'll like go to the bathroom and splash some water on my face and look at myself and just be like, okay, you're here, you've arrived. Because I think it can be energetically and physically easy to just like be floaty when you're walking on stage and you're looking at all the people coming in and the lights, and it can be very activating. And for me, I
Mm.
found that I needed to feel like I was rooted to the stage, rooted on the floor, and able to be present with everyone. So I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe that's like abstract language, but I think any type of grounding ritual is really helpful for me. And it really depends on the event. At the beginning, I again, I think because I was a theater kid, I was like, "Oh, I can't talk to anyone before the talk. Like, I'm going to, go backstage, or I'm going to go in the hallway or isolate myself in some way so that I feel like there's a clear before and during the event." And now I approach it a very different way. I actually kind of prefer to talk to people before I go up, whether it's the
Mm.
person who brought me in or a student who's come to the auditorium early, someone in the hallway. Like something about that really regulates my nervous system and just makes me
Yeah.
feel like, oh, I'm just here to talk to people instead of I'm
Yeah.
here to give this perfect speech. And that really calms me down. So other than that, like drinking water, having a little snack probably like an hour before, um, making sure my outfit, my hair and makeup, that is like a ritual in itself. I think just getting ready in my hotel room, putting on some gentle music and making sure I'm in a good place to serve other people.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It was funny when you said you're you would talk to other people before going on stage. It reminded me of, are you aware of Brene Brown?
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think in one of her books she had mentioned like one of the speeches that she went to, she had like was freaking out or something, and um, basically came back to it's just people that you're in
Yeah.
front of, right?
Yeah.
And so it reminded me of that, and it's it's interesting because it's like it really is just about connecting with other people. And so that totally makes sense that, talking to somebody else would be enough to like ground you and bring you back because it gets you out of your head, right? And that's where it
Absolutely.
really kind of messes with a lot of people is getting stuck in your head. Um,
Absolutely. And I believe it makes you a better speaker too, because like sometimes, I'll be talking to a student in the crowd or something, and she's like, "Oh, I saw that you just, ran your first marathon. Like, I'm getting ready to run my first half." And I'm like, "Oh, that's so cool," right? It has nothing to do with my speech. But then when I get up there halfway through, I'm able to put in a reference about running, or, hey, maybe someone in the crowd is training for their first half marathon, and like she gets really excited, So I think it makes you a better speaker. You're more entertaining, you're more relatable because you know exactly who's in the crowd, who you're talking to. You can pull them into the conversation, and it just makes it more fun for everybody, I think.
Yeah. So do you typically like adjust your speeches? I'm not entirely sure how like a keynote works. Like I assume that you have like a standard speech that you would give that I assume you memorized too at this point, but how much do you actually change that around based on the audience that you're serving?
That's a good question. So I personally, I have like, I have some core keynotes that I give, but I don't think I've ever given the same keynote twice, if that makes
Mm.
sense. So
Mhm.
it's called the same thing, it's marketed the same, the slides are mostly the same, but my actual speech and what I'm saying is different every time. So I would say I tailor it every single time. Um, and there are a couple, stories here and there that will probably sound mostly the same, but I don't have a script that I write out or that I've memorized. It's kind of I prefer, just for my own style, to be in the moment with everybody, and being someone who is very empathetic. I know we didn't touch on astrology yet, but I have a lot of water in my chart. So I feel a lot, and I try, for better or for worse, but I try to feel the audience and like infuse that into my talk as well. So yeah, I think I customize it every time, but the core messages are usually uniform across the board.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. When you're saying that you feel the energy of the audience and um, kind of let your intuition guide you there too, which perfectly based on your chart. So I mean, I'm not completely familiar with your chart, but
Yeah. No, I just pulled astrology out of there. I always do.
no, it's okay. I love astrology, and I could talk about it all day. So
It's so great. I'm a Scorpio sun, Scorpio moon, Sagittarius
nice.
rising, which I think
Okay.
makes a lot of sense. But growing up, I was like, oh, astrology's cool. I didn't really know much about it. But when I had my birth chart read for the first time, I was like, oh, this definitely feels like me. So,
Do you have a Leo midheaven then?
ooh, I don't know what it might be, honestly.
Okay. All right, because that would make total sense with what you're doing.
With the speaking, there is
Yeah.
something about that. I don't know if it's Mars or like I remember someone telling me something about Leo and they were like, this makes sense because you actually like do really well in the spotlight, even if you're like
Mhm.
trying to avoid it, it might be a good thing for you. And I was like, whoa, that's cool. So interesting.
Yeah, I love astrology, and I think it helps um, clarify a lot of things, or at least it did for me.
Yeah,
Um,
me too.
so how have you used other like I typically think of astrology as like a self-development tool in a sense. It can be spiritual, can be just knowledge based or whatever, but in my opinion, I think it's helped a lot in terms of understanding myself and how I've grown as a person and really stepping into a lot of those traits that I was kind of born into, we'll say. Um, so you have obviously explored that path, but are there any other tools that you use or have used in the past to kind of help you get to a place of having the confidence to get out on stage in front of other people?
I love that question. Yes. Well, when I think about practices, because I love anything in the spirit, mind, body realm, not only because I studied it, but just because it's helped me so much. Even I
Yeah.
remember years ago when I worked my first mental health internship, I was working with a lot of folks with really severe challenges. Suicidal ideation, depression, addiction, self harm, a lot of stuff that is really, really heavy, day in and day out. And I remember for my self care practice, I would leave the office and go take a lunchtime yoga class every
Oh,
day.
nice.
And I was so lucky that there was one like a few doors down, but I remember feeling very connected to the mat, the room, just like carving out time for myself and getting to know my body and my energy was so helpful. So, yoga is something that's helped me a lot over the years. It's funny, I do have a teaching certification, but I've never taught in a studio. So I kind of went into that training just really wanting to learn and absorb and understand how to practice, more consistently. But the teachings of yoga are really, really interesting. With that, I think meditation, mindfulness have been really big. And I infuse those into my keynotes as well. If anyone's
Oh,
ever in the
okay.
audience, we will be deep breathing at some point or doing some sort of somatic activity. It's like the Trojan horse of spirit, mind, body practices. I'm like, I'm gonna nudge it in there somehow, even if you don't know it's coming.
I love it.
But yeah, mindfulness, meditation, I've also explored Reiki, which is really
Oh,
interesting. Technically, I have certifications in Reiki 1 and 2, and I studied with an amazing teacher. Her name is Hey Lee, and she's in LA, and just like amazing, amazing teacher in person. But I remember being very fascinated by Reiki because I didn't fully understand what was going on. And people were like, oh, it's energy healing. It's so powerful, all this stuff. And the first time I had a Reiki session, I was like, oh, I didn't feel anything. I don't think this is real. Like I was super resistant and skeptical. I was like, I really don't know what everyone's talking about. And then after a while, I was like, oh, I see. It's like kind of a language of love and like passing on love and energy to each other. And I believe in that. So, I had a few more sessions, definitely learned to love it and feel it in my body. And so that's been really interesting. I don't practice it as much consistently as much as I would like to, but even in protecting my own energy, it's been very helpful, like visualizing white light around me when I'm going on the subway or when I'm traveling, like just feeling calmer, doing visualizations. That's really helpful. But yeah, and then astrology, even things like tarot, I really love. Another practice that I don't do as often as I'd like, but usually when I'm debating a big life question or decision, I love to pull out a deck and just let the cards tell me what message I need to hear. And if it doesn't resonate, sometimes I'll pull another or a third. But I feel like that is another tool that I just love to learn about myself. And then, of course, little things from psychology like the strengths inventory. There's a great one from viacharacter.org, values in action. And
Hmm.
you'll get it's a free quiz and you can get a breakdown of your strengths and how you can use them in your personal and professional life. Things like that I eat up all day long because I'm
Yeah.
like always on that journey of self inquiry and, learning how I can live more healthy and happy and optimally. So, yeah, I think any like personality type quiz, anything that allows me to discover something about myself is helpful.
Oh, yeah, I feel that so deeply. I think it's the Scorpio placement. Like I'm also a Scorpio moon, and so
Yes.
the always digging deeper, always trying to understand is a huge part of my life, and also part of the reason why I created this podcast too, is to like to learn more and to understand and to really get into deeper subjects. And so I love that you use all those different tools for yourself as you're kind of going through this journey. I think a lot of people kind of look at some of these things like tarot and astrology and they're like, oh, that's too woo woo out there.
Yeah.
But I do think there is a lot of value in it. And I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to go down the same path either. Like you had mentioned, there are other like psychological based tools or other personality quizzes like Myers Briggs or whatever. Like those sort of things in my earlier life when I was not so into the spiritual side were really helpful because it did help identify things that weren't immediately obvious or that I couldn't pinpoint.
Absolutely. And one thing I can't believe I didn't mention this as my first one is that I am in therapy and
Mm.
I love it. I'm proud of it.
Mhm.
As a psychology educator, I preach it all the time, but yeah, being in talk therapy has been so helpful. And I get that that's not the method for everybody, but for me as a talker, it has been really helpful.
I agree with that, and I love that you are so open with that too, because I think that is helpful, especially somebody, who has the psychology background. I think some people may look at that and be like, "Oh, she's got it all figured out," but in reality, I don't think any of us have it all figured out.
Definitely not. And therapists have their own therapists too. Like I think people forget that. It's like going to
Mhm.
the doctor. We all need someone and it's so yeah, it's so helpful. I remember though when I first booked my first ever therapy appointment, I was in graduate school studying counseling and even me knowing all the benefits and the textbook definitions, like I was in the elevator going to that first appointment shaking. I was so nervous. I
Mm.
was like, I don't know what I'm going to say. Like I don't know if I have any that voice in your head's like, I don't know if I have any problems to bring to the table that are like worth this person's time. Like your brain starts to
Yeah.
do all these crazy things to you. And then I walked out of there feeling like I had like a load had been lifted off
Mm.
my shoulders. And I was like, why didn't I start this sooner? So I believe in it. I believe in it deeply.
Yeah, that's such a great way to describe it too. It's like you just end up feeling lighter.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to carry whatever it is that you talked about anymore because it's no longer floating around in your head. It's out there and somebody else has, hopefully helped you work through it or validated it or whatever. So I'm also in therapy and I love it. I think, and even as I'm going through like this life transition of, leaving my corporate job and not having like a stable income, that is still one thing that, I've prioritized. And thankfully my husband supports as well. So we're able to continue doing that.
That's awesome. And I'm so happy for you, by the way. I
Thank
think
you.
it's beautiful when people are courageous and take the leap to do something that doesn't always make sense to other folks. And I'm sure you just felt something in your body and your heart and your mind that was like, I need something else. And, from listening to your podcast and just getting to know you, I just think it's such a beautiful thing. And you're setting an example for people who want to do that as well, but might not have the bravery to take the step yet. So that's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I appreciate that. Um, yeah, and really I think that's part of my goal too, is that it's like this isn't necessarily about me. Obviously it's my journey too, but I think being able to share like other people's experiences, other people's stories, how they got there, what they've been through, letting people know that, what they're experiencing is normal. And yeah, there are some parts that suck, but there are also some great benefits at the end of it too. Like being able to say that, you've gone and spoken to hundreds of audiences and you've been able to share your message with other people and really touch people. I think that's an amazing thing. And so I love that you're doing that. So I know we're running out of time right now. Unfortunately, the time went by really quickly.
Yeah, it did. If it always flies by, it's a good thing.
It is. So if there's one thing that you could leave the audience with, maybe a tool or whatever, what would you like to share?
The challenge for me is going to be narrowing it to one thing. What comes to my heart in this moment is self-compassion. If you can imagine a person or a pet or something that you love so deeply that you would never say anything bad about them or to them, you just shower them with love all the time, no matter what they're doing. And then you think about the voice that you use to speak to yourself on the hardest days of your week, or when you mess up, or when you oversleep and miss a meeting, or whatever it is. It's probably not the same voice that you're using to give love to someone else. And so when I think about self-compassion, I just want to leave people with the idea that you deserve the exact same love and care that you would probably very openly and easily give to somebody else. So the next time you're feeling low or not enough or having imposter syndrome, just see if you can be gentle with yourself and celebrate how far you've come.
I love that. Tiana, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure having you on, and I loved hearing about you and your story. So thank you for sharing everything, your vulnerability. It's been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been such a life-giving conversation, and you're an amazing host and interviewer. So thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
so honored.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining. If you would like to get in touch with Tiana, I'll leave her information linked in the show notes. But that's all that we have for today. So thank you and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. What'd you think? She's pretty awesome, isn't she? If you like that episode and you found that inspiring, or you want to share that with somebody else who may be interested in public speaking, I'd love for you to like, comment, subscribe, share this with anybody else who you think might enjoy it. We'll be dropping another episode next week, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you and inspiring you to find your own path.